Distinguished participants, it is a pleasure to contribute to this important event on preventing and healing child sexual abuse. We know that sexual violence against children remains a global problem affecting every country and every region. We know that sexual violence occurs in many settings. It happens in the circle of trust, it happens in schools, it happens in the community, it happens in institutions for the care and protection of children, it happens online. Sexual violence has devastating and lifelong consequences for the health and well-being of children. The harm caused includes early pregnancy, higher likelihood of contracting HIV, drug and alcohol abuse, depression and psychological trauma, suicidal tendencies, and sexualized and risk-taking behaviors. We know that only a small minority of child victims come forward to seek help or advice. They face many barriers, including stigma, shame, and the lack of appropriate and gender-sensitive referral pathways and services. And we know that most of these crimes remain underreported and under-prosecuted. Most victims and survivors do not get the support they need or the justice they deserve. Distinguished participants, research in these fields continues to grow and provide insights into what works in tackling child sexual exploitation and abuse. We must be ambitious about promoting and scaling up intervention that we know will make a difference. We must also be vigilant about evolving threats, such as sexual violence online, while shining a light on issues that have not received enough attention, such as peer-to-peer violence and sexual violence against boys. We know what the barriers are and what is effective in tackling child sexual abuse. This challenges us to ask why we have not made more progress. To respond effectively to these challenges, we must be guided by child rights standards like the Convention on the Rights of the Child and by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We must ensure a systemic, comprehensive, and rights-based approach to ending sexual violence against children and to supporting the healing process. Our action must be integrated and holistic. We must move out of our silos. While sexual violence against children has specific characteristics that must be addressed, it co-occurs with other forms of violence and has many risk factors in common. Often, children sadly experience a continuum of violence. We cannot divide sexual violence online and sexual violence offline. We cannot ignore the connection between violence against women and violence against children. Our vision and action must be broad. This holistic, rights-based approach has a number of important dimensions. One, we need strong legal policy and institutional framework that are properly resourced and guarantee accountability for the authorities responsible for keeping children safe. All forms of sexual violence must be prohibited, both online and offline. Victims and survivors must have access to child and gender-sensitive justice, guaranteeing their dignity, safety, and well-being in all relevant investigation and proceedings. Two, we need to ensure proactive and sustainable prevention. To create enabling environments that keep children safe, we must address harmful social norms and behavior, as well as demand and risk factors, while enhancing protective factors at all levels of the socio-ecological model. Effective prevention requires strong child safeguarding practices by all organizations working for and with children. Imbalances of power allow abuse and impunity to flourish, and there is no group that experiences this imbalance as keenly as children. A key function of raising safeguarding standards is to address this imbalance of power. It is about creating the condition to empower children to prevent abuse from happening in the first place and to ensure there is an effective response should cases of abuse or exploitation emerge. 3. Providing rights-based and integrated services to children who are at risk or have experienced sexual violence is essential. There are many models in existence, but what matters more than the specific model is the approach. We must build services around children according to their rights and their needs, not according to the interests or preference of service providers. Integrated one-stop shop approach that include community-based and informal providers can be very effective in this respect. 4. We need to ensure that children's voices are truly heard. All too often, they are forced to remain silent in the face of abuse and exploitation. Their stories are not believed. They have no reliable channels to report violence that they suffer. We must create opportunities for children to exercise their own power, to be part of the decisions that affect their lives, and to be real agents of change. This means providing child-friendly ways for children to receive information on how to keep themselves safe and where to turn if they need help. We must also support children in their peer-to-peer protection initiative and in their civic engagement. Children themselves are the best guides on how to do this. They should be meaningfully involved in the design, delivery, and evaluation of all such initiatives. 5. We need more and better data. We cannot hope to solve the problem of sexual abuse and exploitation of children without a firm commitment to gathering and using the best available evidence. 6. We must bring an end to impunity and hold perpetrators accountable for these crimes. Seeing justice done and obtaining effective remedies can be a crucial aspect of healing. All too often, victims and survivors feel guilty and at fault for the violations they have suffered. But we must put the responsibility where it belongs, on the abusers. 7. We need to ensure all stakeholders are collaborating effectively to end sexual violence against children. We must work together to raise awareness, to engage in joint advocacy, and to share the knowledge and tools needed to keep children safe. Partnership is the only path to success. We need partnership at different levels, linking global, regional, national, and local action. We must assure partnership between different sectors, linking health, mental health, child protection, education, justice, and social protection. And we must support partnership between different kinds of factors, linking national authorities, civil society, formal and informal providers, and of course, children themselves. 8. Faith-based organizations are also clearly a crucial constituency. They are well placed to act as persuasive and influential advocates for children protection from violence. They also have a key role in raising awareness and mobilizing local communities and families, as they are often the most interconnected and grassroots of all social organizations. To fully realize their potential to prevent and respond to violence against children, faith-based organizations must continue the work towards achieving the highest child safeguarding and reporting standards at all levels. The rights and dignity of victims and survivors must be the first priority, underpinned by a commitment to care, accountability, and transparency. Distinguished participants, we carry out our work against the background of the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that the pandemic and mitigation measures taken by states have increased the risk of children being exposed to different forms of violence, including sexual violence online and offline. The serious socio-economic impact of the pandemic will further increase children's vulnerability. As the world builds back better, child protection, health, mental health, education, and justice must be considered as essential services. They must be linked to an inclusive social protection system, including universal child grants and universal health coverage that will protect the most vulnerable, leaving no one behind. These integrated services need to be an integral part of pandemic recovery planning and seen as a key investment with significant returns for children, families, and society as a whole. We can and must do it for and with children. Thank you.
Thank you for this great opportunity. I've been given this chance to speak on child sexual abuse, challenges and opportunities, and will do so based on my experience for the last 8 years within the Committee on the Rights of the Child, the body that monitors the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but also the Optional Protocol on Child Prostitution, Child Pornography. It has been ratified by 196 states, except for the United States, that means. The Convention requires states to undertake legislative, administrative, and other appropriate measures and prohibits all forms of violence against children in all settings. Of specific interest is Article 34 of the Convention, but also a number of provisions of its optional protocol, which give children the right to protection from all forms of sexual exploitation and abuse, and provides that all exploited children have these rights recognized by the Convention, including the right to recovery and reintegration in terms of Article 39. Our experience within the committee reconfirms the finding by a recent Oak Foundation review that, and I quote, although definitions vary, it is critical to note that child sexual abuse includes acts that do not involve actual physical coercion or threat, and it can often be perpetrated through the use of flattery, bribes, allegiance, status, authority, and misrepresentation of social norms, end of quote. I will not be able to do justice to the topic within the 12 minutes that I've been given. So let me prioritize and focus on 4 areas. First, few facts we have known through our work. Second, prevention efforts, including through legislation. Third, the online space. And fourth, of course, COVID-19. And finally, I will offer a few concluding remarks. The first is, there are few facts that we have known through our work and the work of others. Let me share a few of those here. Child sexual abuse is antithesis to children's rights and childhood. Sexual abuse of children knows no geographical or cultural or income limits. It occurs in countries at all levels of development and affects children of all ages. Child sexual abuse can occur in all settings in which children spend their time, including places traditionally considered to be safe. At least 120 million girls under the age of 20, about 1 in 10, have been forced to engage in sex or perform other sexual acts, although the actual figure is likely much higher than this. It is also gendered, and while women also sexually abuse and exploit children and adolescents, the majority of perpetrators, around 90% of these, are actually males. Experience of victimization and their consequences vary over the life course for girls and boys. For example, younger children are most likely to be sexually abused by a family member or caregiver. Older children are likely to be exposed to a wider range of perpetrators, such as adults in positions of trust, authority, peers, employers, neighbors, and intimate partners as well. The global data on prevalence, as well as children's experience of sexual abuse, designed to directly ask children and adolescents themselves in improving their lives, is also helping to inform interventions, and this is very positive. It is underreported. We know this time and again that many victims of sexual abuse, including millions of boys, never tell their story to anyone. The developmental aspect is also important. Sexual violence results in severe physical, psychological, and social harms. Now, let me move to the second part, which is prevention. Prevention is, of course, what we emphasize within the Convention and its optional protocol, and along with prevention, prohibition, and redress play an important role. Legislative measures to implement the Convention and its optional protocol should explicitly cover all acts that constitute child sexual abuse, including attempt to commit such acts, not only on physical persons, but also on legal persons, institutions, the media, and a whole range of other stakeholders that might be found guilty of perpetrating this violence. States parties should pay attention to the underlying cause of these problems, which may serve to foster, normalize, or perpetuate them, and which require specific awareness-raising measures. Efforts to combat demand should address different forms of violence and abuse, whether online or offline. We need to prevent and end all harmful practices and pay special attention to those practices that can amount to child sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, and so forth. This includes early marriage, child marriage, and the like. It is crucial through legislation to ensure access to redress and secure the availability of child and gender sensitive, confidential, and safe counseling, reporting, and complaint mechanisms to address incidents of sexual exploitation and sexual abuse and protect victims. Mandatory reporting with safeguards is absolutely critical. We also often emphasize that what you don't measure, you can't make progress on. So data collection on the number of cases reported, prosecutions, convictions and sanctions, disaggregated by the nature of the offense, including with regard to online and offline activity, the category of perpetrator, and the relationship between the perpetrator on the one hand and the victim on the other. And the sex and age of the child victim are also important for interventions. We need to reform laws to remove limitation periods for sexual crimes against girls and boys. The responses to children and adolescents who commit sexual offenses should not be the same as responses towards adults. We need to make a differentiation here. While the penalty should fit the crime, and some countries have adopted increasingly harsh penalties for child sexual abuse, evidence indicates that the certainty of being caught is a stronger deterrent to further offending than the severity of the sentence. So more investment in enforcement is absolutely critical. States should also remove the requirement of double criminality, making it possible to exercise extraterritorial jurisdiction over child sexual abuse offenses in another state, even if the relevant offense is not criminalized in that specific state. Also, extraterritorial jurisdiction and extradition possibilities are particularly important for offenses constituting child sexual abuse, where the offender is likely to travel to another country. States should also require the screening of all persons applying for work in which they would be in direct contact with children. Moreover, while on the topic of prevention, one prevention strategy for child sexual abuse involves mandatory age-appropriate, and here the operative word is age-appropriate, educational programs delivered to children in the school environment. There is some indication that children's knowledge of abuse and protective behaviors, including awareness of different types of abuse, body ownership, grooming, safe and unsafe situations, saying no and assertiveness, telling adults, keeping cigarettes, and distinguishing different types of touching improves after involvement with school-based sexual abuse prevention programs. Programs engaging men and boys in violence prevention should be gender transformative and not just enjoin men and boys to intervene, but question norms related to masculinity. There are significant intersections between violence against women and children, and feeding into this synergy is absolutely critical for states. And a final point here is the so-called the scenes of the saviors, namely institutions that are supposed to be safe environments being otherwise. The measures to create safe environments within institutions need to move beyond manipulation of the physical environment or situational prevention to include organizational and individual responsibilities for child safety at home, school, residential institutions of justice and care, and other areas of everyday life. The UN itself, aid agencies, etc., are not immune to this, and it's important to pay close attention. Let me freeze this frame and move on to the online space, both in terms of the challenge, but also the opportunities. With additional advancement of technology and the expanded use of the internet, including by handheld small devices, the problems regarding child sexual abuse material are on the rise. An example of an emerging challenge is a relatively new crime known as webcam sex tourism. It is one of the darkest corners of the web, where pedophiles, often situated in the developed world, pay or offer rewards to facilitators in other countries to sexually abuse children, giving direction to the facilitators on actions to perform through online live streaming services. Some internet dens, for example, in the Philippines, have been closed down, but more remains to be done. New developments in information and communication technology facilitate greater circulation of child sexual abuse material, including through peer-to-peer file sharing platforms and increased use of mobile devices by child predators. Use of cloud-based services allow sex offenders preying on children to avoid the risk of carrying incriminating evidence through customs or border checkpoints. The increase in live video streaming of child sexual abuse and the growth in the production of self-generated sex images, sexting and sextortion are all adding to the wide circulation of such material. Another technology-fueled development that is gaining traction is the use of virtual currencies, such as Bitcoin, to purchase commercial sexual exploitation material. The optional protocol establishes legal liability of internet service providers, ISPs, where appropriate, and this requires the attention of all states. We are often, as a community, one chapter behind these developments, though we need to be one chapter ahead of them. States should criminalize the acts of recruiting, causing, or coercing a child into participating in pornographic performances, profiting from or otherwise exploiting a child for others for such purposes, and knowingly attending pornographic performances involving children. Children find themselves in an unusual legal position when they take intimate photos of themselves, which might amount to pornography. Here, the emphasis on the 4 Ps: police, parents, principals, and peers. The need to undertake efforts to raise awareness among children of the gravity of spreading images of others and oneself needs to be part and parcel of the legislative, administrative, and other measures that states undertake. Progress can and should also be achieved through institutional measures. The extent to which institutions charged with regulating as well as monitoring internet-related activities comes within our view as a committee. Some places become new frontiers because the gaps in law and ill-equipped institutions would be an attraction to perpetrators, and the law reform efforts need to be undertaken in all corners of the world. Acknowledging that the continuous circulation of sexual abuse material, in addition to perpetuating the harm done to child victims, contributes to a perception of the child as a sexual object and risks strengthening the belief among persons with a sexual interest in children that it is normal, since many others share the same interest. Now let me move to COVID-19. The pandemic has exacerbated the existing vulnerability of children, but promising interventions aimed at preventing sexual abuse are being implemented. In the face of alarming trends, many countries have introduced new or scaled up social protection services for children. For example, by July 2020, at least 60 countries had strengthened social protection for children and families as a response to COVID-19, including by setting up new child grant programs, increasing the value of existing child grants, and extending the coverage of targeted cash transfer programs, which are critical to prevent child sexual abuse. A number of governments maintained essential services and have made it clear that the household isolation measures for COVID-19 do not apply if someone needs to leave home to escape domestic abuse. Argentina, Botswana, Chile, El Salvador, Kenya, Nigeria, Peru, and South Africa, for example, have strengthened gender-based violence reporting systems by expanding hotlines and offering new WhatsApp, text, or email reporting options for those who cannot make a phone call because of being within earshot of their abusers. Europol, for example, has also sought to increase ongoing prevention and awareness campaigns that highlight the risks to children's safety online, such as the Say No campaign. States are called upon to integrate prevention, mitigation, and responses efforts on sexual abuse as part and parcel of their COVID-19 responses. Let me offer a few concluding remarks and finish. Much of the research evidence on risks and drivers on child sexual abuse has been developed in high-income countries. There is a need to look beyond those countries. Girls continue to be invisible within justice systems, including as victims of crimes such as sexual abuse, pointing to the necessity for more gender-responsive interventions across child justice systems. Over-reliance on donor funding for core services such as referral services for child sexual abuse is often not sustainable, and it needs to be paid close attention by states. Through the Sustainable Development Goals, states manifested their intention to invest in children and ensure a world where children could be free from violence, including to end sexual abuse. In the end, leadership could be the defining marker for success or failure here. And success is not only about the end result, ending child sexual abuse, but rather also about achieving the end result sooner than later. And this call for action, does it make an urgency on the side of children, an emergency on the side of any state? Absolutely not. Since all states have been aware of the problem of child sexual abuse for years, if not decades. The International Human Rights Framework has recognized it for a long time, and organizations such as the UN have been preoccupied with the issue for an extended period. In the end, we often say, everybody loves children. In this particular case, love is not a noun, it's a verb. It requires action. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning, good afternoon, or wherever you are in the world. I'm very pleased to be with you and to contribute to this important event. The very first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Sexual abuse and exploitation of children are amongst the worst affronts to human dignity. It's denying them their status as individual rights holders, as acknowledged by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the most ratified treaty in the world. It is a form of violence which tends to remain hidden and underreported, leaving children alone with their trauma. Online sexual abuse, critically on the rise, even more so now during the current pandemic, exacerbates the suffering of children who are aware that images of their abuse are likely to stay online. When this happens, chances are that consequences will last for life. Guarantors of children's rights are not only governments. Governments must lead policies and create institutions to turn these rights into a reality. But they cannot do this alone. They need support, health professionals, social workers, teachers, parents, civil society, tech companies, as well as faith leaders. All have to play their part. For Albert Einstein, the world was a dangerous place to live, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. Because of their proximity to the community and their leading role in children's education, faith leaders are in a unique position to help children not only to recognize and avoid risky situations, but also feel safe in reporting them. We need to work both on prevention and on support to victims. Prevention is not a marginal issue. It is an integral part of the Church's mission. With the right support, victims can become survivors and can go on to thrive and live fulfilling lives. However, the measures currently taken by various stakeholders are mainly reactive and ineffective. Root causes of sexual abuse of children are not being addressed adequately by anyone. This is very much about addressing the enabling environment, which relates to the social, cultural, gender, and institutional constructs that foster the conditions in which sexual abuse of children is either ignored, tolerated, or even accepted. Instead, faith leaders, moral authority, and social influence are powerful tools to create a culture of respect for children's rights and zero tolerance to violence against children. By including these issues in their work, it is within their reach to protect children from abuse and help whole communities to thrive. But to play a leading role, a shift in the mindset of faith dignitaries themselves is often necessary. The taboo surrounding issues such as sexuality education, which would provide children with tools to protect themselves, is a real problem. The provision of sexual and reproductive health education should be supported by faith leaders. Child victims are often blamed and treated as offenders, including by their own families, who consider child victims of sexual abuse tainted or unworthy, leading to abandonment and social isolation. Faith leaders need to make families understand that sexual relationships with children are not consensual. The practice of child marriage involving sexual abuse continues to be condoned and celebrated in many parts of the world and by several religions. Deeply embedded in patriarchal norms and gender discrimination, these practices continue to shape harmful societal norms. Many, if not all, of the values of the world's religions are in harmony with the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child. And when there's doubt, faith communities are the platform to discuss and confront ideas with leaders of faith who have informed and educated themselves. Such discussions are necessary in all parts of the world and in the context of all different religions and faith communities. To give you a glimpse of what I saw as United Nations Special Rapporteur on the sale and sexual exploitation of children, let me tell you about my visit to the Gambia. I saw firsthand the plight of very young Taliban living and studying at residential daras, neglected or abandoned by their families due to poverty or in the context of migration. Very few receive any formal education beyond learning the Quran. On the contrary, children are exploited by caregivers and marabouts to beg. During my visit to Malaysia, I learned about recurring cases of sexual abuse of children in Tafiz schools, including by the school principal. Cases in such educational settings are frequent but rarely reported. I'm not sure parents always measure and understand the risks to which they expose the children, and even if they do, how they can avoid them. Children in these unsupervised and unlicensed religious schools are extremely vulnerable to abuse and exploitation and in desperate need of protection, which faith communities could channel or provide. What I find most arresting is the fact that there are allegations of sexual abuse of children across all faiths and religions, in the very places where children should be safe and loved, churches, mosques, temples, or other places of worship, as well as educational settings under their authority, they are being harmed. Because of their proximity to the community, religious organizations must be at the forefront of child protection. This includes making children know their rights, that their views are taken into consideration, that they recognize the protection figures and can safely report abuse. And they must know that to defend their rights, they can challenge any person, no matter the authority or power he or she has over them. Children who report sexual abuse are often neither believed nor taken seriously. At best, they are ignored, at worst, shunned. One of the reasons children do not report abuse is because of feelings of shame and guilt. Another reason is fear of retaliation and stigma affecting the family or the community. Education in general, and religious education in particular, can help to avoid the trap of nourishing feelings of shame and guilt by aiming at empowering children to feel safe in reporting them. Blame and banishment need to become a thing of the past. Given the hurdles for children themselves to lodge a complaint, it is important to ensure community-based mechanisms to address situations of sexual violence against children. When the abuse occurs within the circle of trust, such as the family, which constitutes the majority of cases of child abuse, the support of the community, and in particular religious communities, can be life-saving. Voluntary reporting by members of a religious community requires also leadership by example within the faith community. Faith leaders need to support children by listening to them and by making them feel safe in reporting. In doing so, they can help children to keep or regain their dignity, something to which every human being aspires. It is within their reach to ensure that victims have access to counseling and reporting mechanisms or to report suspicions themselves. This immediately raises the question of how and if this can translate into a duty, for example, of a priest of the Catholic Church who receives this information in the course of a confession to signal the abuse. While I respect the absolute prohibition of breaking the seal of confession, as confirmed time and again by the Catholic Church, allow me to raise the question whether there is nevertheless space for confessors to assist victims and prevent further abuse by the penitent. For example, where a penitent sexual offender, through his dialogue with the priest, seeks help and spiritual direction, the latter can help preventing offense and reoffense by guiding him or her to a third party under no impediment to report. Allegations of ongoing historical clerical sexual abuse of children, including the alleged cover-up attempts by the members of the Catholic Church hierarchy, continue to raise concerns regarding the accountability of perpetrators and redress afforded to victims, the lack of preventive measures, and the culture of secrecy surrounding the circumstances of alleged abuses. I met with survivors of the mother and baby homes historical abuse in Ireland, occurring in the second half of the last century. All they want from the state and the church is the truth and an apology, nothing more. The decision by the Vatican of 17 December 2019 to abolish the pontifical secret, thus ending a policy that shielded priests from criminal punishment by the secular authorities, was a welcome first step. By removing that cloak of confidentiality, the Roman Catholic Church changed its stance to make it acceptable, though not required, to turn information about abuse claims over to the police, prosecutors, and judges. This step should be followed by further measures to ensure that justice and redress for victims around the world is delivered through prompt and thorough investigations that are subject to public scrutiny, the prosecution of alleged perpetrators, and enforced mandatory reporting for all clergy or staff who have knowledge of these heinous acts. It was an important signal to the local church, who is in denial, but also to the faith community at large. It triggered the debate of the collective and systemic responsibility of the church in many countries. Reparation is an important dimension of accountability. Too often forgotten, it must be a natural part of our response to the suffering of a child. As jurisprudence has shown, courts are reluctant to grant compensation for acts which cannot be directly attributed to the convict. It is through a compensation mechanism that collective systemic responsibility of the faith community is acknowledged. This was, for example, the case in recent decision of the Diocese of Lyon in France to provide a lump sum for 14 survivors of clerical abuse during scout camps, notwithstanding the decision to acquit the archbishop accused of having covered up the abuse. Ladies and gentlemen, where there is no remedy, there is no justice. And where there is no justice, there can be no peace. And that very much applies to inner peace and healing for those who have been harmed. Disclosure is often a first step towards the process of recovery, a way of moving from being a victim to becoming a survivor. While states have the primary responsibility to provide care and recovery and reintegration into society for child victims through a full range of laws and policies and services, partnerships with and active involvement of faith communities in awareness raising and education programs targeted at families, communities, and society at large to change negative attitudes and stigma and discrimination against child victims can be decisive for these victims to engage in a healing process. This includes empowering children through child-sensitive procedures and accessible avenues for participation in this process that foster a sense of agency in their care, recovery, and reintegration program, keep them informed, and allow them to be consulted on decisions affecting them. Above all, what we need is a common voice. All world religions are united in wanting to protect children from this devastating harm. We just need a common answer. That answer must be based on the understanding that every child is entitled to respect of his or her dignity, and that it is our duty to ensure that when this basic right has been disregarded, we spare no efforts to allow children to recover their dignity and to develop their full potential in an atmosphere of happiness, love, and understanding, as the Convention of the Rights of the Child says. Thank you.
Greetings from New York. I'm pleased to participate in this landmark symposium. Child sexual abuse is a violation of human rights and a public health problem with significant consequence for global health and development. Through Target 16.2 of the Sustainable Development Goals, the international community has committed to end all forms of violence against children, including sexual abuse. Over recent decade, awareness has grown of the nature and scale of the problem. Every year, millions of girls and boys around the world face sexual abuse. At least 120 million girls, about 1 in 10, have suffered some form of forced sexual contact before the age of 20. Sexual abuse occurs everywhere in every country and across all segments of society. Most often, abuse occurs at the hands of someone a child knows and trusts. Roughly 90% of adolescent girls who report forced sex say that their forced perpetrator was someone they knew, usually a boyfriend or a husband. But many victims of sexual abuse, including millions of boys, never tell anyone and suffer in silence. Based on data from 30 countries, only 1% of adolescent girls who've experienced forced sex reach out for professional help. UNICEF plays a key role in preventing and responding to sexual violence, both in emergency and non-emergency contexts. Globally, we build advocacy tools and develop technical guidance. We work closely with partners, including the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, Together for Girls, and the We Protect Global Alliance to End Child Sexual Exploitation Online. At the national level, UNICEF works with government to develop and strengthen laws and policies and to increase access to justice, health, education, psychological and social services that help children and child and adolescent victims and survivors recover. Last year, across 144 countries, UNICEF reached 4.2 million girls and boys who had experienced violence with direct service support. We also invest in national prevention programs to change social norms that tolerate sexual violence and perpetuate a culture of silence. Throughout all we do, we focus on supporting children and parents. We work directly with children to build their knowledge on how and where to seek help and protection, and with parents and teachers and adults to identify signs of abuse and make sure children receive ongoing care. Across the world, we see the unique and crucial role played by communities of faith in promoting the dignity of children and creating conditions for children's optimal development and well-being. Faith leaders can also make a unique contribution to preventing and responding to child sexual abuse. You may be familiar with the ecological model, which we often use to demonstrate how factors at multiple levels intersect to increase or reduce the likelihood of child abuse. I would like to use the model to elaborate how faith leaders engage the whole community in dealing with child sexual abuse. This reveals the challenging and complex role that the faith leaders navigate and highlights opportunities for positive influence and impact. The first level identifies the individual child, victim, or survivor of sexual abuse. In many contexts, a faith leader may be the first or main source of help for a child victim of sexual abuse. Children may turn to a faith leader for spiritual guidance and support before or instead of secular professional services. Especially in low and middle income countries, there may be no formal child protection service, and many of the responsibility for safety of children will be handled informally by communities or taken on by faith-based organizations or non-governmental organizations. This presents an opportunity to build on the strength of the faith community in supporting the child. Faith leaders hold a psychosocial valuable tool in interpreting events, solidifying positive community and individual identity, and ultimately building resilience. In fact, they can reinforce beliefs that help children and caregivers to recover from or manage adversity. There is an established body of research, literature documenting how religious beliefs frequently operate in support of resilience, values of positivity and motivation, and ways of interpreting change equip children and their caregivers to withstand shocks. Religious coping, however, is not monolithic, but it is expressed differently in different contexts. In some cases, religious views promote specific claims that may hinder resilience by promoting fatalism and blame. Indeed, local faith communities will have access to issues that are considered too sensitive, taboo, or stigmatized to openly share with externally. For example, a study of Kikuyu survivors of gender-based violence in Kenya highlights how faith communities were the only actors able to provide mental health counseling in that context. However, evidence also suggests some local faith communities can perpetuate stigma by failing to challenge social norms that undermine individual resilience. Faith leaders may even be reluctant to do anything when sexual abuse is brought to their attention. This may be due to taboos around discussing matters related to sexual behavior, a poor understanding of sexual abuse of children, not wanting to shame the victim or survivors within their community, or simply not knowing what to do. As such, it is vital to continue building understanding of child sexual abuse and its impact, and the integral role of faith community in supporting child victims. This conference provides an important platform to build this common understanding. At the relationship level, a child's closest circle most often includes their parents and siblings. Depending on their living situation, it may also include carers and other children. It is well documented that the impact of child sexual abuse extends beyond victims. Their parents and siblings can be significantly affected. If abuse occurs within an institution setting, other children and staff may also be impacted. The impact can be intergenerational. The faith leader has a role in working with parents and siblings of children in addressing the impact of abuse. This is a complex and sensitive task. The voice of local faith communities can greatly influence attitudes linked to child abuse and the mental health problems that may be experienced by the child or family as a result. These issues greatly impact progress towards recovery and healing. Faith leaders play an instrumental role in promoting nurturing care, open communication, positive parent and child relationship, building awareness by educating family members about mental health issues, and they're well placed to provide direct counseling and support and make links to appropriate mental health and psychosocial service. Even beyond the child and their immediate circle, we have seen how entire communities can be impacted by the revelation of child sexual abuse. The cohesion of a faith community can be destroyed through the revelation of child abuse and poor institutional response to them. In recent years, there's been increased attention to institutional child sexual abuse, including abuse perpetrated within religious institutions. Past cases have revealed how priority was sometimes given to protect the reputation of the institution and perpetrators above the interests of the child. While there has been progress over the last 2 decades to address systematic failures, some institutions remain reluctant to change. To ensure that all religious institutions are as safe as possible for children, it is important to introduce or improve safeguarding policies and systems. This also includes improving child participation and empowering within faith communities, which can address some of the barriers to disclosure of abuse. The societal level of the ecological framework constitute macro-level factors that influence sexual violence, such as gender inequality, religious or cultural belief system, and social norms. Faith leaders have the advantage position to deal explicitly and constructively with interpretation of scriptural, doctrinal, or theological principle used to justify or indirectly enable child sexual abuse. In Cambodia, for example, UNICEF has worked with Buddhist leaders to develop a curriculum for monks, students, and Buddhists that incorporates Buddhist scripts alongside national and international laws to improve respect for children's rights to protection. At this level, there's also the potential to embrace the transformative power of religion to foster strong and protective influence and promote the resilience of children and families. Finally, there's also an opportunity for harnessing spiritual mandates for practical action to protect children and build child-safe communities. Faith leaders have committed to this crucial work in several programs, global platforms, such as the Religion for Peace, 8th World Assembly in Japan in 2006, to the Interfaith Alliance Forum in Abu Dhabi in 2018. In closing, let me emphasize, child sexual abuse is one of the greatest human rights and public health challenges of our time. Ending child sexual abuse is now on the global agenda, but we need to accelerate action to prevent child abuse and support responses which respect and engage victims and communities. The faith leader has a unique and crucial role in this effort. I want to thank you, and we look forward to continue our work with all partners to ensure that every child can live a life free from child sexual abuse. Thank you.
Good day to all of you. I'm Alex Butchart from the World Health Organization in Geneva, and it's my pleasure to join you for this symposium. My aim is to provide an overview of the INSPIRE 7 Strategies for Ending Violence Against Children technical package. Each letter of the word INSPIRE stands for one of the 7 strategies. I for implementation and enforcement of laws, N for norms and values, S for safe environments, P for parent and caregiver support, I for income and economic strengthening, R for response services, and E for education and life skills. In his February 2019 address to the Vatican on the protection of minors in the Church, Pope Francis advocated for the use of INSPIRE as a framework for action within the clergy, and I'll now provide an overview of INSPIRE. The INSPIRE technical package is made up of 3 publications. The core document sets out what we can do to prevent violence against children. The implementation handbook provides detailed information on how to implement the package, and the indicator framework provides tools for monitoring the uptake and the impact of INSPIRE interventions. The aim of INSPIRE is to support countries to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal targets on ending violence against children. By doing so, INSPIRE can also help to achieve other targets, such as those on communicable diseases, mental health, substance abuse, gender equity, and education. The 6 main types of violence covered by INSPIRE occur at different stages in a child's development. Maltreatment of infants, children, and adolescents by parents and caregivers. Bullying, which often takes place in schools and other settings where children gather, and online. Youth violence that occurs among children aged 10 to 17 years and includes physical assault with weapons and may involve gang violence. Intimate partner violence occurs against girls within early or forced marriages and among romantically involved adolescents when it's often called dating violence. Sexual violence includes forced sex and non-contact violence, such as sexual harassment, and emotional or psychological violence, which includes restricting a child's movements, ridicule and threats, and the witnessing of violence between parents. Each of these types of violence can cause the other, and they often occur together. So Inspire advocates for addressing sexual violence as part of comprehensive violence prevention efforts. The Inspire core document has one chapter per strategy, which describes evidence-based interventions organized into different approaches. A final section addresses multi-sectoral coordination, monitoring and evaluation, and a last chapter looks at several implementation considerations. This bird's eye view of the Inspire strategies and approaches shows the government sectors that are typically responsible for supporting them. The next slides describe some of the evidence for the effectiveness of these strategies and approaches. Laws that criminalize violent behavior are important for deterring potential perpetrators, and just as important are laws that address risk factors, such as firearms. In this example, enforcement in South Africa of the Firearms Control Act saved over 4,500 lives, including those of many adolescents, across 5 years in South Africa's main cities. As you can see, firearm homicides declined much more than non-firearm homicides. Strengthening norms that support non-violent relationships is about changing the idea that some forms of violence are acceptable. Children witnessing violence between parents is one of the ways by which such violence is normalized and increases the chances that they will grow up to use such violence themselves. Interventions that prevent intimate partner violence are thus important in preventing violence against children. SASA, a community mobilization program developed in Uganda, reduced intimate partner violence by 52% and is estimated to have decreased the proportion of children who witnessed such violence by 64%. Safe Environments focuses on modifying the social and physical environment to foster positive behaviors. For example, the Cardiff approach reduced hospital admissions for violence-related injuries by 42% and police-recorded injuries by 32%. The intervention involves combining data from hospital emergency departments and the police to better identify hotspots for violence, and then with municipal officials and business owners intervening to reduce the risk factors in those settings. Parent and caregiver support programs aim to reduce harsh parenting practices and create positive parent-child relationships. Support can be delivered through home visits or in groups. In the USA, the Nurse-Family Partnership Program led to a 48% reduction in child maltreatment. Income and economic strengthening entails providing cash transfers together with parent training or education on gender norms. By way of example, Image pairs microfinance with education on HIV, gender norms, and domestic violence. A trial of Image in South Africa found that it reduced intimate partner violence by half among women in villages that received the intervention. As noted earlier, this will also have reduced the proportion of children witnessing domestic violence, and with that, the likelihood of their subsequent involvement in violence. Children who have experienced violence may require access to good quality health, welfare, and criminal justice support services. These can help to break the cycle of violence in their lives and help them to recover if violence has occurred. Trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy is one intervention mentioned in Inspire. A review of 11 trials found that it reduced trauma symptoms and functional impairment among children exposed to violence by 37% when delivered to individuals and by 56% in a group format. The E in Inspire stands for education and life skills. Gains in education can protect against victimization and perpetration of violence. This strategy thus involves approaches such as increasing school enrollment and providing life and social skills training. A review of hundreds of life and social skills training programs found that they reduced aggressive and disruptive behavior in school settings by 25% when delivered to all students, regardless of risk, and by a third when targeted to selected high-risk students. So from this brief overview, you can see that violence reductions of 20 to 50% can be achieved by well-designed programs. However, there are big challenges to scaling Inspire approaches up, and I'd now like to end by highlighting two of them. First, we have a very long way to go if we are to end violence against children by 2030. Here is the headline finding from the Global Status Report on Preventing Violence Against Children 2020, where 155 countries reported on what they're doing to support Inspire implementation. Although over half of all countries are providing some kind of support for the Inspire strategies, only a quarter considered that their support is sufficient to reach all who need them. The second challenge has to do with COVID-19. Societal responses to the pandemic have increased the risks of violence against children. They've also created challenges on how to deliver interventions, all of which were developed before the pandemic for in-person implementation. Efforts to deliver Inspire interventions through virtual channels and their evaluation must therefore be prioritized. So many thanks, and for more information, please visit the Inspire website at the link shown on this slide. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Dr. Melissa Merrick, President and CEO of Prevent Child Abuse America, and I'm so thankful and thrilled to be with all of you today. Our mission is to prevent the abuse and neglect of our nation's children. We envision a world where all children grow up happy, healthy, and prepared to succeed in supportive families and communities. We do this work through our nationwide state chapter network and evidence-based home visiting model, Healthy Families America, in about 600 sites across the country. And of course, we advocate for good policies for children and families to keep them safe, strong, and thriving. We also raise awareness, not just for the problem of child abuse and neglect, but for the prevention solutions that require a collective approach. We all have a role to play in keeping children safe, strong, and thriving. Prior to leading this organization, I was a senior epidemiologist at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, where I worked to prevent adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, like child sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse is a significant but preventable public health problem. A problem is defined as a public health problem if it satisfies three conditions. One, if it's prevalent, meaning it affects many, many people. Two, if it affects the health of the public in multiple and impactful ways. And three, if there are prevention solutions that can prevent the problem in the first place or can mitigate the negative outcomes conferred by the problem itself. In the case of child sexual abuse, all of these conditions are satisfied. Although estimates vary across studies and many children either wait to report or never report child sexual abuse, the data show that about 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 13 boys experience child sexual abuse at some point in childhood. Experiencing child sexual abuse is an adverse childhood experience that can affect how a person thinks, acts, and feels over a lifetime, resulting in short and long-term physical and mental health consequences. Some examples of some of the physical health consequences include unwanted or unplanned pregnancies, physical injuries, and importantly, chronic conditions later in life, such as heart disease, the leading cause of death in our country, obesity, and cancer. Examples of some of the mental health consequences include depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and shockingly, the odds of attempting suicide are 6 times higher for men and 9 times higher for women with a history of child sexual abuse than for those without such a history. Some of the behavioral consequences include substance use and abuse, including opioid use and misuse, risky sexual behaviors such as unprotected sex and sex with multiple partners. Another outcome commonly associated with child sexual abuse is an increased risk of re-victimization throughout a person's life. For example, recent studies have found that females exposed to child sexual abuse are at a 2 to 13 times increased risk of sexual victimization in adulthood. Individuals who experience child sexual abuse are at twice the risk for non-sexual intimate partner violence. We also know that the total lifetime economic burden of child sexual abuse in the United States in 2015 was estimated to be at least $9.3 billion. Although we know this is likely an underestimate of the true impact of the problem since child sexual abuse is underreported. So what do we do? First off, adults must take the steps needed to prevent child sexual abuse in the first place. Adults and society are responsible for ensuring that all children have safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments. Unfortunately, resources for child sexual abuse have mostly focused on treatment for victims and criminal justice-oriented approaches for perpetrators. While these efforts are important after child sexual abuse has occurred, relatively little investment has been made in primary prevention or preventing child sexual abuse before it occurs. Limited effective evidence-based strategies for proactively protecting children from child sexual abuse are available, and many more resources are needed to develop, evaluate, and implement evidence-based child sexual abuse primary prevention strategies to ensure that all children have safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments. The CDC has identified particular gaps in research and practice that are important to address our efforts to promote primary prevention of child sexual abuse. They note additional efforts in CSA prevention are needed to improve the surveillance systems and data collection processes for monitoring child sexual abuse. Increasing our understanding of risk and protective factors for child sexual abuse perpetration and victimization. We must strengthen existing and develop new evidence-based policies, programs, and practices for the primary prevention of child sexual abuse. And we must increase dissemination and implementation of evidence-based strategies for prevention. But we know that prevention happens in partnership. No single agency or entity or sector or discipline can really provide and create those conditions for lifelong health and well-being. We need all of us working together. We all have a role to play. Youth and family serving organizations, public and governmental agencies, faith communities, and other leaders must have the information necessary for effective primary prevention strategies. All this to say, we have come a long way in this field. The history of our field that have really led us to this moment to actually prevent child sexual abuse is a pretty young history. In the first generation of this work, I would say dating back to the 1960s, we focused on raising awareness. We wanted people to know that there were these problems of child abuse and neglect that were happening in our families. But we did that, especially for child sexual abuse, we kind of perpetuated some myths. Stranger danger was sort of the platform back in the day, when we really know that over 90% of child sexual abuse is perpetrated by someone the child or family knows and trusts. So then as a field, we went straight to intervention, which mostly focused on treatment solutions and early identification approaches. And although critically important, we did not prioritize evaluation and building evidence, and we certainly didn't prioritize the public health imperative of prevention. And now we have begun to do this. We're building evidence, and we're really poised now to shift the narrative to one of child and family well-being. In this time of widespread change, uncertainty, and an overload of stress on our families, we are acutely aware of the need to honestly assess where we've been and plot a deliberate course forward for ourselves, our organizations, and our communities. The choices we make and actions we take today will inform how we all flourish in the years to come. That's why Prevent Child Abuse America is committed to reshaping how our country addresses child abuse and neglect prevention. We intend to continue to shift the narrative away from reactive after the fact child welfare systems to a proactive, holistic approach that supports child and family well-being and prevents violence before it occurs. We will work across the public, private, and philanthropic sectors to assist communities in developing more just and equitable systems that benefit all children and families and break harmful intergenerational cycles of poverty and trauma. We recognize that all families need help sometimes, and that seeking help is a sign of strength and resiliency. Community and family support helps keep children safe and well. We should all strive to keep children safe with their families, as opposed to safe from their families. But to do this, we must assure the conditions for health and well-being and strengthen families in supportive, thriving communities. By enlisting diverse community stakeholders, most importantly, families with lived expertise, we can help them to discern and develop the supports, resources, services, and approaches to meet the unique needs of their families and promote the conditions to help all of us thrive. We will also align resources to provide a full prevention continuum that strengthens community protective factors and mitigates associated risks. This is the moment to build a child and family well-being system that propels families to grow and thrive together. But this work must extend beyond discrete programs and processes. It must become the lens through which we view the entirety of our efforts. As Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman shared on Inauguration Day, the new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Please join me to help ensure the safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments that enable children, families, and entire communities to thrive today and for generations to come. Together, we can prevent child abuse, America, because childhood lasts a lifetime.